Burlesque by Kamari333. Chapter 1. The Cell Phone. Of all the bars Red frequented in Ebbet City, this was his favorite. It was 3 in the morning, and Red was on well, there were 2 empty bottles of bourbon, but that didn't mean much. He had already seen the creepy waitress take away at least one that night, so there was no telling now how many he had gone through. If Red had to guess, it would be 3, not counting the half-empty one he was currently nursing, or the 36 shots of vodka he had indulged in at the previous establishment before it had closed at midnight. It was a good thing he couldn't get alcohol poisoning, or Red might have killed himself a long time ago. Not for the first time, Red's keen intellectual mind wondered why every one of his favorite hangouts was a bar run by a fire elemental, all named Grillby. It was quite the coincidence, especially considering how similar and yet different they all were, both in looks and temperament. For example, the Grillby's that Red had been kicked out of at midnight was owned and run by a royal purple fire elemental, usually sporting an ungodly amount of expensive jewelry and something made of white fur, who, while soft-spoken, was hot-tempered and money-grubbing. On the other hand, the fire elemental who was cleaning the bar to his right lit the room with a burnt gold light, accented by the blue flames that served as the tips of his hair as he swayed to the music in worn jeans and a fishnet shirt that displayed his muscular contours. From what little Red could remember of their interactions, usually by the time he entered this bar he was already tipsy at best, this Grillby was a flirtatious social butterfly, vocal and earnest. Not that many of the patrons could appreciate that, given that, like all the other Grillbys that Red had met, this one also spoke in the dialect of fire, a language that was rarely taught and even more rarely understood by anyone but other fire elementals, which is probably why all the Grillbys he had met, even the foul-tempered, pretentious purple asshole that he had known for years but still refused to ease up on his fucking tab because stars forbid he lose even a single gold piece, had a soft spot for Red. He was one of the few people, human or monster, that understood their native tongue. Even when he was so drunk he couldn't pronounce his own name, Red could still understand those crackles and hisses that almost everyone else required someone to translate. Red slammed down the now empty bottle of booze, feeling his body spasm in the skeleton equivalent of a hiccup. Yeah, he was a skeleton monster. Big whoop. Want to fight about it? And blinked back the haze of multicolored dots from his vision. He was not ready to pass out yet. He still hadn't drowned every last one of his useless feelings. There were some left. He could feel them, waiting for him to let his guard down behind the veil of intoxication. That was not acceptable. Feelings meant dreams, and he had no intention of dreaming tonight. Red sank back into the cushions of his plush red chair, snatching up the bottle of mustard and drinking it straight as he waved for a refill. Most of the night he had been using his shot glass, mixing the alcohol with his most favorite of condiments, and putting them back like the champ that he was. However, by this point, Red was almost blind drunk, and his hands were not steady enough to pour anything without spilling. That would have been a waste, so now he chugged both bottles, one after the other, as he let his now glazed eyelids wander to the stage. That was something else that differentiated the establishments that shared the name Grillby's, the ambience. Every one of them had a different setup, different decor, and of course, different entertainment. The purple Grillby's was more like a casino with slot machines and blackjack tables, which Red took full advantage of when he was there, usually to the chagrin of both the house and other players. He almost always made a killing. There was a Grillby's that was more like a bar and grill, a simple but clean mom-and-pop style with warm wood floors and a gentle orange owner. Red rarely went there, it being on the other end of town from his shitty apartment. There was a Grillby's that was a karaoke bar, with a large dance area and a regular DJ. The music there was always the best, requested by the patrons for their ideal singing and dancing experience, and nobody complained when Red asked for something loud with heavy guitar that he could drunkenly air strum to. And of course there was this place, the strip club. Red propped his head up with one arm on the table, the mustard bottle still in his teeth, his eyelids dim and unfocused as he stared at nothing. Yes, there were plenty of strippers in the joint, most of them wandering the tables looking for someone who wanted a lap dance. However, none of them bothered to come for him anymore. He had made his lack of intention clear the first time he had wandered into this place. Red was of the mind that his money was better spent on spirits. Attention that was paid for was shallow and fake, and he was so fucking tired of fake. He faked his smile at work, he faked sleeping at home, he faked being a functional member of society 5 days a week, and he faked being okay with the worthless piece of shit he had become. Red faked everything. Except being drunk, or high, or angry. Oh, Red never had to fake being angry. So usually when he came here, he ignored the ladies and gentlemen who wandered around in provocative attire, only ever giving the waitresses enough attention to get his refills. He just sat there, quietly growling at his life, floating on the din that was nothing but white noise in his compromised mind. The waitress set the latest and probably last. Even Red had his limits, and he was starting to think he was reaching them. Bottle of booze in front of Red. Breaking the seal on the top with his thumb, he threw his head back to chug it. Then he heard it, the change in the music, the hush of the crowd. Red smirked, letting his eyelids return to the stage, watching as the spotlights hit the figure now braced against the pole. It was another skeleton monster, dressed in tight leather pants, a black shirt with a cyan blue heart that didn't cover more than half his ribs, and a pale purple vest with a fluffy blue faux fur lining. Red had seen him before. He always performed around the same time on Sunday night, danced to one song, then all but disappeared. Unlike most of the performers, who always danced to something seductive, this one only worked to something not that. Once he had performed to a classical piano movement, another time it was to a fast-paced teen pop song, another time it was to the work of a barber quartet singing about the joys of having sizable genitals, which had Red laughing for the entirety of the performance. Red never knew what to expect from this one. Tonight the song started with a light string opening that led into a steady rap song with vulgar, but in Red's opinion, evocative, lyrics. He knew this song, a work by a human group called Hollywood Undead. The irony wasn't lost on him, but even Red had to admit that if humans were good for one thing, it was their music. The monster swayed his pelvis seductively along to the music, using his hands to make suggestive gestures that had Red's uninhibited mind filling in the blanks. The way his lithe bones moved around that pole, up and down and side to side. Although Red had always enjoyed this monster's performances, tonight it was particularly hypnotic. He watched as the monster climbed up the pole seemingly effortlessly and hung there by nothing but his femurs. Had magic been involved, Red would have sensed it, and there was no magic. He swung himself around, showing off the flexibility of his spine and the length of his tongue, which glowed a lovely amethyst just like his eyelights. Then he slid down the pole again and danced around it, flirting with the crowd, which was now screaming and hooting and whistling like Red wanted to. Red smirked. There was nothing fake about that guy. Red was an unusually observant person and prided himself on his skill in reading people, honed over the years by need and necessity. So Red knew that every move he made, every flick of his tongue over his teeth, every flare of magic in his eye sockets, he meant it. Even his smile, with the way that it strained against something that looked like loneliness, wasn't fake. He was genuinely having fun, despite himself. And that was the most attractive thing in the whole goddamn world. Red slammed the now empty bottle he had been drinking from down so hard it was a wonder he didn't smash it. Nope, don't even go there. Red waved over the waitress again. He was clearly not drunk enough if he was able to think about that kind of thing. The song ended, the crowd cheered, and the performer took a bow before leaving the stage, glistening with sweat that slid down the spines of his vertebrae and clung to the wings of his ilium provocatively. He wove his way through the crowd, that smug, seductive grin on his face, his thumbs hooked in his vest pockets as he approached the bar. Red forced himself to look away, burying his face in his arms, considering the pros and cons of letting himself pass out right there. 3 more bottles of bourbon later, Red stood up. Mission complete. No more feels. Time to head home. He shambled over to the exit, falling a few times like the giggling drunken mess that he was, before managing to make his way out into the pre-dawn darkness. Red stumbled down the badly lit sidewalk, keeping close to the building walls for support. He had just reached the end of the building, his foot centimeters from where the sidewalk intersected with the back alley. The nearest street lamp flickered out, leaving him in near total darkness. Red briefly considered taking a shortcut, but given the fact that his magic tended to fritz when he was this drunk, and the last time he tried he had ended up in the true lab sans his pants, he had long ago decided it wasn't worth the risk. He waited until his blurry vision became manageable, then set off to continue forward. and rammed himself into someone, knocking them both over. Red growled, pushing himself away from the other person and rising to his feet. He stumbled back, gripping the corner of the building, his claws digging into the bricks. Screw it. He snapped his fingers, not giving a damn, as he fell through the void onto what he dimly hoped was his own bed. Red promptly rolled over into the musty, unmade mattress and let himself fall into his hard-won, dreamless sleep. Lust leaned on the sink of the strip club bathroom, cleaning up the last of the residue from his quickie with Grilby. He tossed the paper towels, now stained orange, into the trash bin and looked one last time in the mirror. Lust fixed his shirt and vest, making the subtle adjustments that made the difference between looking grunge and looking wrecked. He smiled, satisfied with the result, but then again, he had had so much practice, it was more time-consuming than troublesome. Slipping out of the bathroom door, Lust made his way through the back and out the rear exit, gulping in the night air as he leaned against the outside of the cold metal door. The chill felt good against his bones. He was still sweating, although he wasn't sure if it was from the exertion or the lingering heat of his fuck buddy. Lust sighed, running one of his hands over his skull. Probably both. Lust had made a deal with Grilby a long time ago. Twice a week, Lust performed to whatever song Grilby wanted, usually something ridiculous, and Lust not only got free drinks, but a percentage of the tip jar. The little rendezvous they peppered in over the course of the night were just icing on the cake, satisfying the burning need for both of them. Lust couldn't complain, really. He enjoyed dancing, he enjoyed drinking, and he certainly enjoyed Grilby. But over time, what had once left him feeling nothing but satisfaction, now left him empty. It wasn't that the sex was bad. Far from it. Lust was still feeling tremors. But Lust knew that they were nothing but friends with benefits, and that just wasn't enough. Lust wanted something more. He wanted someone he could call at all hours, someone who would look at him with more than just, lust in their eyes, someone who would hold his hand and laugh at his jokes, someone with whom he could enjoy a companionable silence as well as witty banter. He wanted someone to come home to, someone who wanted to come home to him. He wanted what his brother had in Metaton. Lust ground his teeth, squeezing his eyes as tightly as his fists, as the hollow ache in his soul grew just a little bit bigger. He had hoped, once upon a time, that Grilby would have been that someone. But Grilby had made it clear that, while he valued Lust's friendship, he had no intention of settling down with him. And it hurt. It hurt that this was how it had turned out. And even though he wanted something more, even though he knew it was stupid and foolish and unhealthy, Lust couldn't turn down what little Grilby was willing to give. So he took it, and he let himself pretend for just a little while. Lust took another deep breath, gently pushing himself off the door and stretching his spine, making a cracking noise. No more pretending tonight, though. He fixed his usual smile on his face as he took the 3 concrete steps down into the darkened alleyway, heading for the street. He could have taken a shortcut, but his body was still overheated, an unfortunate side effect of sleeping with a fire elemental, and a walk through the spring night air would do wonders. Besides, he'd make any excuse to postpone going back to that cold, lonely, empty apartment. The nearest street lamp flickered out, leaving him in near total darkness. Lust hooked his thumbs in his vest pockets, no hesitation in the movement of his feet. He had taken this path so many times, he could do it with his eyes closed. He knew it down to how many steps it took to get from the door to the street. A few more steps, and he knew he had stepped onto the sidewalk, just to be sent sprawling to the ground, knocked over by a larger figure. Lust was stunned by the bulk that now lay over him, which smelled of mustard and alcohol. He heard a growl, but before he could say anything, the person had thrown themselves off of him. Next he heard a grating sound like stone being ground against stone, accompanied by panting. And then there was silence. Lust lay there, confused and uncertain, until the street lamp flickered back to life, showing Lust he was alone. He sat up, patting himself down to make sure he hadn't been hurt. It didn't feel like it, but given his stats, he didn't think it was a bad idea to double-check. Satisfied that all was well, Lust braced his hands on the ground to push himself up. The fingers of one hand brushed against something. Lust looked down. It was a cell phone. He picked it up, pushing off the ground in the same motion, and bringing it up to his face for inspection. It was a flip phone, an older model like his own, which looked well cared for, if a little scuffed from frequent use. He opened it, finding it had half its battery, a few tiny shallow scratches in the screen, but otherwise intact. It must have been dropped recently. Lust looked around. There was nobody in sight. He sighed, pocketing the device before continuing on his walk. He'd find the owner somehow. Later. Lust eventually caved in and went home, shortcutting from the park, which he had walked across town to wander in, to his dark apartment bedroom. He had promptly fallen into the tangled mess of unmade sheets on his bed and gone to sleep. A sleep which he was rudely awakened from by a loud, edgy ringtone and a heavy vibration coming from his vest pocket. Lust jumped a foot off the mattress, fumbling sleepily to turn off the skull-shattering noise by answering the phone. He didn't remember setting that ringtone, and it was clearly a custom one. Finally got it. Lust flipped the phone open, using his other hand to palm away moisture from his sockets. Hello? Sons! Someone screamed from the other line, their voice rough and gravelly, but oddly familiar. Where the fuck are you? You were supposed to be here 5 minutes ago! Lust snapped to attention, his drowsiness forgotten. Nobody had called him by his name, his real name, except Papyrus, in years. Wait, that voice. Paps? You sick or something? You sound a bit hoarse. And you sound like you finally washed your fucking mouth out! The voice snapped, sounding, if anything, more irritated. Now get your lazy ass over here this goddamn minute! The voice cut out, pausing. Hello? Lust asked, worried for a moment that the call had been dropped. How the hell are you doing that? The voice came through, a bit more distant, away from the receiver perhaps, but no less clear. It was a loud voice. It sounded like he was talking to someone, but Lust couldn't hear the other end of the conversation. Talking on the phone without being on the damn thing! And saying 2 things at once! Lust blinked, then snapped on a light. He examined the phone in his hand. It wasn't his. It was the one he had found last night on the curb. Must have left it in my pocket last night. Then who the fuck was I talking to? The voice, which the more he listened to it, the more it reminded Lust of his brother, albeit crude and aggressive. There was the sound of growling, then the receiver grinding against bone. Then a low, gruff voice, deeper than the last, spoke. Listen here, you fucking thief. I don't know who you think you are, but you mess with the wrong fucking monster. I'ma find you, and when I do, you're gonna wish you weren't never born. Les smiled. Oh, baby, I love it when you talk dirty. He couldn't suppress a chuckle. Hey, that sounds like fun. But maybe I can just return your phone. This is your phone, right? There was a pause. Thought pickpockets had more balls than that, the guy muttered. Lust clicked his tongue behind his teeth. That's rude. I didn't steal anything, sweetie. I found it on the sidewalk. A thought struck Lust, and he grinned wider. After a certain someone knocked me down, as someone who had been drinking? There was another pause. Bingo. He pressed. So is it safe to assume you know where Grilby's strip club is? Meet me there tonight at 8. Bring my damn phone. Not a problem, darling. Lust purred. When you get there, tell the bartender you're looking for Lust. If I'm not already there, he'll point me your way. Lust got a grunt in response, and then the line went dead. Lust chuckled again, closing the phone. It had been a long time since he had felt a rush like that. He would have to get to know this other Sans. He sounded like a fun guy, and Lust needed a little fun. The sound of a loud, obnoxious alarm blared through the gross apartment. Red groaned, pulling the coverless pillow over his head. He hated that goddamn thing right now. His head was killing him. That was a horrible side effect of his drink himself so far under the table dreams can't follow method. The following morning was torture of the highest caliber. Too bad the nightmares were worse. Red threw the pillow with a snarl at the offensive, noisy object, knocking it off the table so hard it dislodged its plug from the wall socket, turning it off instantly. Red squeezed his socket shut, rolling out of bed and onto the floor. His fall was cushioned by the many socks strewn about. With another groan, Red crawled down the hall to the bathroom, shedding his clothes along the way until he was in nothing but socks and the leather collar he refused to take off. He then pulled himself into the tiny elongated bathtub. With a little blind fumbling, he got the cold water running and let himself lay there under the faucet. Soon enough, the pounding began to ease up, and Red let out a sigh of not-so-exaggerated relief. He sat up, turning off the water and shaking his body, not only to throw off the moisture, but to get his bones to settle. He rubbed his teeth, thumbing the gold implant thoughtfully as he allowed his clouded thoughts to catch up with him. Pain, gone. Still wet? Yeah, don't care. Plans? Yeah. Help boss set up his new TV at... Shit, what time is it? Red scrambled out of the tub, throwing off his now soaking wet socks, leaving them in the tub in a pile he should probably think about moving, and diving for his jacket. Shit, 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 shit. He pawed through his pockets for his phone to check the time. It wasn't there. Why wasn't it there? Fuck! Red scooped a black sleeveless t-shirt off the floor, doing a quick sniff test before throwing it on. He had lost his goddamn phone. Shit. Boss was going to ride his ass if he found out. It was bad enough getting a lecture on responsibility from anyone, but it really stung when that lecture came from his little brother, whom he had practically raised. Red did not want to deal with that. Slipping into his jacket, Red went about quickly sorting through the clothes on his floor, discarding a pair of shorts that looked alright but smelled just past the point of being acceptable in lieu of a pair with a brown stain on the left pant leg. Finding socks was easier, since there was an unopened package of new ones sitting on the couch. He tore it open and slipped them over his feet, then slid on his still-tight sneakers. Then he took a shortcut to his brother's apartment across town. "Get your lazy ass over here this goddamn minute!" Boss's voice, loud and gravelly and full of undisguised irritation, met Red's ears as he came into the living room where his brother was standing, one hand on his hip, the other holding his cell phone to his head. The instant Boss saw him, though, he cut off sharply, and a look of what Red could only describe as bewilderment took over his features. "Did I interrupt something?" Red asked, trying to keep the confusion and curiosity out of his voice, his hands resting lazily in his pockets as he leaned against the wall where he knew his brother could easily see him. Boss looked between the phone and Red with suspicion and bewilderment and no small amount of irritation. Red raised an eyebrow ridge. "Boss? How the hell are you doing that?" "Doing what?" "Talking on the phone without being on the damn thing, and saying two things at once." Red twitched. "Boss, I don't got my phone." "Then who the fuck was I talking to?" Red balled his hands into fists, a growl rolling from his chest. Son of a bitch. He'd been robbed. Somehow that was worse. That meant somebody had gotten the drop on him, probably last night. It burned at his pride, his ego, that he could allow that to happen. His growl only growing louder, Red closed the distance between him and his brother, snatching the phone from his hand with blue magic and slamming it a little harder than he meant to against the side of his skull. "Listen here, you fucking thief. I'ma find you, and when I do, you're gonna wish you weren't never born." He was answered by a lilting chuckle. "Hey, that sounds like fun. But maybe I can just return your phone. This is your phone, right?" Red froze. That wasn't the response he had expected, assuming he got one at all. "Thought pickpockets had more balls than that," he muttered, more to himself than the unusual person on the other line. There was a soft sound, somewhere between a click and a pop. "That's rude. I didn't steal anything, sweetie. I found it on the sidewalk. After a certain someone knocked me down, a someone who had been drinking." Red froze, his maxilla burning with shame. So he had just been clumsy? "So is it safe to assume you know where Grilby's strip club is?" the voice asked, tapering off into something close to singing, but not quite. Red ground his teeth. "Meet me there tonight at 8. Bring my damn phone." "Not a problem, darling," the voice purred. "When you get there, tell the bartender you're looking for Lust. If I'm not already there, he'll point me your way." Red grunted in response, then pressed the end call button on the touchscreen. Fucking hell. Red wasn't sure what threw him off more, the voice itself or the words it had spoken. Then a much more jarring voice brought Red back to the present. "You lost your phone?" Red cringed, handing back Boss's cell phone and mentally preparing himself for the loquacious reprimand that was already flowing freely from behind his brother's teeth. If you have a request for a recording, whether a one-shot or a series, let me know in the comments. I also do commissions, details of which are on my Patreon. So keep in touch. Bye!